Hello, this is John Quinlan, and welcome to this edition of Forward Forum. We're here at the Sun Prairie Media Center and going to have a very fun and fascinating conversation, I'm quite sure, with someone I've wanted to be in conversation with for some time. Sharon Kilfoy is with us, and Sharon is a local artist and activist who combines those two realms in some really fascinating ways. Ordinarily, at this point, I would give you a long bio, but I think the entire hour will kind of give you some sense of who Sharon is and what she does. And I think just kind of start by letting her introduce herself. Hey, Sharon, welcome to Forward Forum.
Well, thank you, John.
We have a variety of things we want to talk about. I know there's a couple of titles. Essentially, you are part of something called the Dean Arts Mural Arts Project as its director, and you also did a lot of work at the Willie Street Center. But what's the best way to introduce people to who Sharon Kilfoy is and how arts and activism intersect for you?
Well, thanks, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I think of myself as an artist, primarily as a muralist. After that, I had started the Williamson Street Art Center. It still is my place. But recently I am partnering with Dane Arts, with Dane County Cultural Affairs Commission, in a new project, Dane Arts Mural Arts, the intent of which is to bring mural painting to the entire county.
Wow, very exciting.
Yep. So I'm thrilled.
So if people are wandering around the community, no doubt they will very quickly come across a project that you've been involved with in the past. Can you just give us a little bit of a sampling of some of the projects that you've worked on in terms of murals throughout the community and some of the background on why those projects were important?
Well, let's start right here in Sun Prairie. I'm so happy to be here in Sun Prairie, in this lovely library. Right down the street is the Civic Theater, their rehearsal barn. I painted two walls there, actually. It's the entire side of a barn and then the far south-facing end. That was done with kids from the Prairie Phoenix Academy, their SOAR program. I also, prior to that, painted a mural at the Angel Park. You can also get there by just going right down Linrod here. And that, I would say, still remains one of my very favorite murals. We did all four walls of a small little building. It's the bathroom building. But that's where the Corn Festival is held every year. That's where they have the race car stuff going on. It really feels like art of and by and for the people there. Also, after doing those two projects, we did Prairie Phoenix Academy itself, which partly faces on Main Street here in Sun Prairie, and we did the entire perimeter of the school with a mural. In some places that mural is only 6 inches high.
Really?
In other places it's 2 stories high. So that was just a fabulous, fabulous program. Sun Prairie is a little different from Madison, say, in that all of these special programs are under one roof.
Yeah.
So you've got the alternative high school, you've got work and learn, you've got the pregnant teens who certainly have special educational needs, you've got emotionally disturbed middle school kids. So all of those programs are in that one building, and I've worked with all of those kids.
Wow, that's exciting.
So that's Sun Prairie. I've done very similar things throughout Madison. My own Willie Street neighborhood, there's the Wilmar neighborhood mural, there's the one on the side of the Social Justice Center. Both of those were done with youth from Wilmar Neighborhood Center. We've got a new one coming up there that will be on the back of the Social Justice Center. I can tell you about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Centro Hispano, I did maybe, it depends on how you count. I've done probably a dozen at Centro. That was a 4-year-long residency, worked with all of the kids at Centro. Also there on the south side, Omega School, I've done a couple there. The one at the Labor Temple, another artist had started, but I finished that up. I actually painted about 2/3 to 3/4 of that mural. A lot of schools.
So let me stop you there, because we can go through the entire hour probably just you naming some of these places, but I want to back up. Actually we're seeing some things. Yeah, let's go ahead.
Let me just interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Here's Centro Hispano right now, and that last slide was of a mural that's at the it's in the West High School Cafanasium, this one right here. And that I did with kids who are in West High's alternative program. They're at the Hoyt building down the street right next to Hoyt Park. So those rock formations sort of echo what it looks like there at Hoyt Park. It was the kids' idea that we show this universe that looks different from the one that we're in, although it is Madison, obviously, with the Capitol. And then that was a kid's idea, too. They said, let's show us painting a mural in the mural. And I said, well, okay, let's see how we can pull that one off.
Wow, that was cool.
Yeah, no, that was just a fabulous group of kids to work with. Awesome educators there in Madison at the SAIL program, just like here in Sun Prairie.
I think that there's a certain fun in art that is self-reflexive in a playful way, so I like that idea. Mark, we could go to the shot that's right after that. We started to show the wall of Centro Hispano. That's something I wanted to back up to that you had described. So this is the exterior. I want to talk about the interior in a minute.
This is the exterior at Centro Hispano. I had done, 10 to 12 murals inside Centro.
This is down on Badger Road between Fish Hatch and Park.
Yep. And this is the story of immigration. And I think at first I was picturing, maybe the Aztec calendar in the corner. I met with leaders from the Hispanic world, and they told me what it was like. They said, we all started out as field workers. We worked in farms. We worked at canning factories. Centro was central to many of our lives. Then we went on to graduation, and here at the very end are the dreamers, who are children who were brought here at a young age, who many of whom don't even speak Spanish, have never been back to their native land, and who are caught in between two countries, really, who do not have the rights they should. Here's the outside of Centro Hispano. We've also done mosaics here.
Wow.
But through this work, I think I've learned so much about disenfranchised people right here in Madison. Being a product of the 60s, of course, I was interested in activism. The university was shut down 3 out of 4 of the years that I was here because of the protests that were going on.
You were out there probably with Paul Soglin at the time, huh?
Learning was in the streets.
Yeah.
And I think there are many of us who carried that through. We are in so many ways a product of our times. And it's something I think that it becomes clearer and clearer to me the older and older I get.
Let me offer you. So I'm probably I graduated high school in '78, so I missed some of that. It's kind of interesting for me to go back, be in conversation with folks who actually lived through the protests and other things, and to learn from that, and to discover that I have my own series of things. The conflicts in Central America, the other things, and anti-apartheid protests and other things that happened in the '80s. I want to come back to Centro though for just a second. Again, Centro Hispano. Ilda Thomas, who was one of the founders, was a really close friend. I discovered after the fact. I was telling you, my parents were both missionaries. Well, Ilda trained with my, I guess it was my mom or my dad. I don't know. No, rather not Ilda, but her husband Fred did, because Fred, her husband, met Ilda through the Methodist Missions Program in Uruguay, where Ilda was from. I didn't discover that until much later. And we were working both at in the what was the old Community Action Building on South Park. And my picture had been on the front page of the paper about the gay rights parade. She came in and gave me a big hug and started talking about how important she thought that was. And she had many gay and lesbian friends back in Uruguay who never really had a chance to develop that part of their life. And then we figured out maybe a couple months later, I had probably seen her the first time when I was 1 year old, because our parents,
there was that family connection. Well, my eldest daughter, Shadera Kilfoy Flores, had worked at Centro when she was young and had worked with Ilda. And as you enter Centro, the first mural that you're exposed to emulates the kind of plaza that you would find in Mexico or Latin America, so that people who are coming there for services are able to just kind of take a nice deep breath and say, oh, this feels like home. and people who haven't been there can become inspired and say, whoa, this must be what it's like to be able to visit these countries. But right behind the desk is a picture of Ilda.
Yeah.
There's a central room that is called the Heroes Room, and we put heroes of the Hispanic world in there, people from throughout the Latino community here in Madison chose those heroes, and then there are also cultural heroes in various corridors, but those people in that inner room are all political heroes, and one of them, of course, that we're very proud of here in Madison is Clarence Kalin.
Absolutely.
Is included there.
Was honored to do a show on the 100th anniversary of his
so
birth recently.
He is honored as a hero in Centro Hispano's salon of heroes of the Hispanic world.
So not to personalize it too much, but you know, as we reflect on Ilda and Clarence, people who were very significant in my life, to see their faces and to see them in the context of a mural that depicts the backdrop under which they existed in terms of their lives, their accomplishments, and other things. That's especially powerful, I think. You know, so this isn't just an abstract thing; it's a very personal thing. And of course, the very nature of political work and activism, the personal is the political, and just I think you evoke just such powerful effect when you do these murals. You educate a younger generation, but you also impart memories. You remind us of the resonances in our own lives and other people's lives. I mean, is that part of why you do what you do?
Very much so. The mural that we're referring to there at Centro Hispano, the heroes of the Hispanic world. I don't consider myself to be much of a portrait painter at all. I'm much more adept at landscapes.
Sure.
And so here I'm faced with, ooh, how am I going to do this whole room full of heroes? And actually at the time, you know, there was that wonderful graphic that Shepard Fairey had done of Obama, and there was a site called Obama Size Me. You could take any photo and feed it in there, and it would come out in 3 different planes, just like a t-shirt, say. And I was able to project those onto the wall and then label dark, medium, light, and I gave people the paint. And so really it was color by number, paint by number. And I didn't know how people would react to that if they were thinking, oh, and they loved it because it was fail-safe. It's not like they had to sit down and do a portrait of somebody, but they still could paint their hero. And so people did Che Guevara, or people did whomever it is that you know, from their own culture, and from Jose Marti, say, from Cuba, whoever they related to the most, they said, whoa, could I paint that person? Could I be the one? Yeah, so it was very cool. Could I do Cesar Chavez? And they felt very honored and connected to be able to paint their hero and have it turn out to look very nice, too.
The other thing this reminds me of, just a tip, once you bring your arm out so you're not pulling at the mic.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. We just don't want the sound to be affected. But yeah, so I spent much of March in Selma, and a friend of mine was a co-founder of the Voting Rights Museum there, which is very grassroots. But at the most powerful things that are there are the portraitures and the art by students and the other things. Again, art just evokes feelings and history and the motivations of the people behind important elements in history, in ways that maybe a photograph doesn't always evoke. Not that photographs are important, but anyway, again, it just strikes me that what you do, the creation process itself, the engagement you're describing, and the people that are taking an event or a person who's important to them, again, it comes back to the fact that the work we do in this world is always very personal. It is,
John, and just what you've said now makes me think of a number of things. First of all, that Herzog movie, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, in which he films that cave, which I think prior to that we had thought the oldest cave was 30,000 years old. This one was 60,000 years old.
In terms of cave paintings? And,
yes, wow. Yes, in France. and Herzog is able to get in there and film it. And my thought in watching that was, whoa, that was me back then.
Yeah.
I had always thought that the oldest art form was music, that heartbeat that music represents. And yet seeing that movie and seeing those depictions of the natural world as produced by artists so long ago, I thought, boy, the impulse to want to leave your mark and to want to represent what's close to you, that relationship between the eye and the brain, I think, is as close as that relationship between the heart and music. I think it goes back, it's as deep within us. So that's my first.
Well, we're just real quick. So a couple of cave painting related memories for me. In India, my mom and I visited some amazing cave paintings. I have to show you the pictures sometimes. But again, to think that folks 10, 20, 60,000 years ago, in some ways had the same impulses that we did
that we still do, to leave our mark, but to also use art to make meaning of the world. When you talk about, you said something about that evocativeness of storytelling through art, and that sometimes that can be more so than a photograph. When I first started doing shows at the Respite Center, which we go back when you were at Center for Families, and I was too, the Respite Center being the 24-hour crisis center here in Madison for kids birth through 14, which is a national model of crisis care for kids.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I would do exhibits of art that the kids had done, and then put quotes, and people would tell me that it would bring them to tears, and it was that combination of the art, but also the words from the children themselves that I thought was particularly powerful. So it's that ability to tell someone's story visually that I think it's very deep.
So I'll come back to Center for Families for a second. Just one other cave-related reference. My cousin who lives in Portland, Maine, took me to a party, and it was an unveiling. Someone had taken their condo and had painted those French cave paintings, recreated them on every single wall of their apartment. Oh. Wow, that was just amazing. And then, could tell you the stories behind them and how they were discovered and everything else. But art is so much fun that way. There's just so many ways you can weave it into your home, your life, the places that you frequent. I mean, it's just so cool that way.
What I've been doing mostly lately, I miss some of that, more personal, internal stuff. It has really been building community.
Yeah.
And doing murals, and murals are large projects even if you're doing them as public art as an individual who has vision and paints on the wall, it's still large. But if you're doing it as a community project, which means that people are involved in the decision-making of what's going to be represented, how you're going to go about doing that, it gets much more complex. As the artist, you can't go in with a preconceived idea and think, oh, okay, well, the next mural I do in Sun Prairie, I think, should be about X, Y, or Z. No, you've got to get to know Sun Prairie and get to know that group that you're working with, and get to know what are the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations. What is it that about this piece of art is going to tell a story that will be meaningful to this community when I leave? Because they will be living with that work.
So let me see if this parallel works. So I'm writing a book now called Voices of Conscience and Courage, and originally it was very different than what it's evolved into. And so it was originally going to be sort of stories in silos, 24 different stories, but I realized they all connect. They're also part of my life. They're also part of who my parents were, and how the entire world connects with each other. So the book that I started has taken in different directions. It's like it has a life of its own. Do you occasionally start on a project, a mural, and realize that the end result is maybe different than what you thought of it at first? Does it take on a life of its own?
Oh, every time. Every time. I've learned not to really spend much time thinking about how it's going to look when it's done, because if I had tried to do that, I never would have been right. I would have failed 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I never know in the beginning how things are going to look. So I have to just keep myself open to the experience. Right now, talking about art and activism, but part of what we're doing with the Dane Arts Mural Arts program is trying to bring art to neighborhoods, to communities, to people who might not otherwise have access to the arts, who might not otherwise have the ability to have an experience such as mural making. I had no intention of doing another mural in my Willie Street neighborhood. We're so lucky and so fortunate to have the amount of art that we have. The neighborhood association has been most generous. They have a lot of funds because of all the festivals that we do. However, the fact that a young man who was a personal friend to my family, a neighbor who was shot and killed less than a block from my house.
Oh, that's right.
There's no way as an artist that I can't respond to that having happened. So that's the new mural that will be happening on the back of the Social Justice Center.
So paying a tribute to Tony Robinson.
This will not only be a tribute to Tony, this will be a tribute to Paulie Heenan, this will be a tribute, the young woman's name is escaping me. There was a young woman just a couple of years ago who was in a very agitated mental state. There was a young girl a few years back sitting on a front porch. She and her friend were playing with a gun. It went off, killed her.
Yeah.
So there have been a number of people in the neighborhood who have lost their lives through violence. This will not be a mural about violence. This will not be a mural about justification. This will not be a mural about RIP. This will be a mural about happy times in the neighborhood. This will be showing Tony skateboarding, showing Paulie playing guitar. We just got the approval from Landmarks, the Landmarks Commission. It's a historic district, so we need to go through that process. Tony's their family members who are Masons, they're going to be helping to fix that wall in the back. So we're just in the very, very initial stages of planning for that mural. But I feel that it's essential that those young kids who live down the street from me, who all congregate at Doris King's house, who are all friends of Tony's, that they have an outlet, that they are able to express themselves in a way that's positive. And for me, that means making art. That's what I can offer to them.
I just want to pick out a couple of threads. You stated this well. Actually, the previous two shows we did in the studio did touch on Tony and his life and had this resonance with developments around the country. As you pointing out, very often the young people who were killed by the police are in agitated states that aren't their normal state of mind. And part of the struggle is to get the police to understand they have to find ways to de-escalate those situations and not have them end in death. And so I think the message that's underlying all of this is so important. But I think back to shortly after Tony was shot and we lost him, someone from the Goodman Community Center decided to publish a blog essay about the Tony they knew, the young man filled with compassion and wisdom and dedication to building a better community, because whether it was the police trying to justify their actions, who printed every negative aspect of his biography and his father's biography they could find, or the media that think they're doing a good investigative job by ferreting out all of the different things. I'm sorry, he was a 19-year-old young man, and whatever race or background 19-year-olds stumble, and that's part of what gets them to be, active, participating adults. And so it's just absurd, how distorted the picture was if you don't bother to dig deeper. So what you're doing is really powerful, because what you're trying to evoke, I imagine, is lifting up all of the marvelous things he was, all of the lives he touched.
Well, I think that this kind of a project can be healing for those who are really close, but I think it can also hopefully be enlightening for people who are not. I think there are many people in the community for whom this is an abstract occurrence.
Right.
It's not as personal as it is when it's someone that you knew, someone who went to camp with your granddaughter. You know, it hit many of us in the Willie Street neighborhood much harder because this was a kid that we knew personally. And so I think seeing portraits of all of these people, hopefully it will personalize it for others, and they will say, whoa, you know, I didn't know these people, but boy, she looks like a wonderful girl there, and and that looks like such a nice young man. What a joyful gathering this is of all of these people. So I'm hoping it will serve a variety of functions.
I love what you said. You know, I found out about the Robinson shooting on the Saturday morning of the 50th anniversary of the celebration of the Selma to Montgomery March. I was in Selma, and it was announced from the stage, and it was in the context of this amazing presentation that our viewers will see before too long into the summer. It was people who had been teenagers at the time of the march in 1965 talking to teenagers today, telling them they could make a difference. But there was a moment of silence. And then, because I think I had my Wisconsin cap on or something, people knew I was from Wisconsin. So, you know, there were probably people from 24 cities across the country that had had their own Tony Robinson experience. But again, that notion of holding up the precious young man at the core, and the fact that we live in a society where the movies, the news, all these popular images, unfortunately, only largely show negative portrayals of especially African-American young men, but the African-American community. So all those celebrations of culture and life and connection, you know, just so important. But the other thing, just briefly, the other thing that comes to mind is, having spent much of the last 10 days helping Molele Chikasa and Nana get an exhibition that's down at the municipal building on King Boulevard in Madison. You know, we were just having dinner with her last night, and I keep stumbling into this, which is a very white thing to do. You know, we talk sometimes, you know, I think it's very easy for us to invoke, it's not that we shouldn't invoke slavery or lynching or some of the negative stuff, but immediately I get a reaction back from her. That's just like a white person to kind of look at that. There's actually a depiction, a historic exhibit on the second floor of the municipal building. It's very much, you know, this white perspective of you know, kind of documenting kind of the horrors of the worst of things. And what Molele tries to do with the Umoja magazine and this art exhibit is hold up the best, tell the good news, tell the stories we never hear. So it sounds like that's really evocative of what you're trying to do.
That very much so is true. There is a mural, and I don't know how I would be able to tell this wonderful young woman who's helping us with images here how to pull it up. But it was one that I did in Mexico. I was only there for a week. It was.
I think it was early in the sequence, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. It was in San Pancho, and the kids worked with another artist from the community center. This was at a secondary school. It's a fishing school, and they showed the beautiful landscape of Nayarit as it is now, but then they did a section too that was the future and their fears for the future, and it was bottles and tires thrown up on the beach, and it really did go to a bleak world with fires, and you know, it was not at all the beautiful, lush, tropical world that's there now. And just looking at their drawings and their images, a lot of it was caused by motor vehicles of one type or another, and there was no way I could say, well, we're not going to do that negative theme. So I actually kind of did a small part of the wall that's the future, and then the larger part of the wall was the present. I thought it was quite a lovely, evocative mural. The young woman had designed a hourglass that went right in the middle between those two worlds, but with very few exceptions, and that being one. I do try very hard to show the positive world. I just did murals.
Incidentally, the mural you're talking about, perhaps we can promise our viewers that we'll try to bring that up in the end credits. So we
Okay,
can
the
come
one
back
from
to it
San
later.
Pancho,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I just had a residency last year at both Boys and Girls Clubs. Well, actually, I did a mural at the Allied Drive, and then two muralists who are working with me, Amita Roller and Alicia Real, they finished up one that's
Yeah.
going to be installed soon at Taft Street. And I was actually just out at Allied this morning, and it's true, you know, at first it's kind of like, oh, is this some other white woman coming in that, you know, thinks she's going to be helping us out or whatever. And it takes a while, I think, to establish relationship, to build connection, and for
Exactly.
people to see, yeah, I'm coming out here doing something positive, but I'm working. You know,
Right.
I'm doing hard work, and I'm working with kids. And the mural that's there at Allied, it shows people barbecuing. It shows people sitting under trees and reading. It shows kids out on the playground playing. What we did, the neighborhood center director, that site director, Tiffany, sent out email. She polled the neighborhood. She polled parents of kids who come to the programming and asked, what are the themes that you'd like to see in a mural? And then she gave me that whole list, and, you know, over and over, we want to see barbecue, we want to see the neighborhood, we want to see the park. And so I had that feedback
Yeah.
from the neighborhood in terms of what they want to see in their mural. Community gardens, they wanted to see that. So some of it might be something that's just beginning to flourish in that area, especially Allied, all the concern about it being a food desert. The fact that there's a food pantry there at the neighborhood center, the fact that, you know, they're starting to do some community gardens out there,
Yeah.
that's important to people. And the barbecue, that's important, but also the kids having a safe place to ride their bikes, being able to study, people reading books. That was all input and feedback that I got from that neighborhood about what they wanted to see. Mostly it was kids who came in and painted
Yeah.
with me, but there were, during the summer camp, but there were a couple of adults, there were a couple of staff members who just got extremely engaged and involved. But through the course of my time there, I mean, I just saw the cook this morning. I said, gee, you know, I'd love to be doing another project here. Vernon, one of the youth workers, I ran into him somewhere, and he said, when are you coming back to Allied? So now that I've done the residency, I've established those relationships, I could start, because
So
now I'm part of that place.
Sorry you're up, but I want to come back to several things just again to punctuate them, to kind of draw them out a bit. I want to explain myself a little bit better. So Malala was certainly not saying we shouldn't depict these negative pieces in history, but you're getting at a lot of what she was getting at. Very often as majority culture, we become presumptuous about having no context for the imagery or not understanding the emotional charge. We are ahistorical. We don't understand that a picture about lynching is essentially reinitiating trauma that is ingrained in people and you know and basically drives their choices and their feelings in the present day. So anyway, as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my favorite pieces of art, which is by no means an uplifting, happy piece of art, is Guernica by Picasso. And for a time, I first of all saw it at a Picasso retrospective my mom took to me in 1980 when I was 20 years old. It was all of his stuff, which was just incredible. But it was, you know, it was the pinnacle piece of the exhibit. And I just stared at that thing for hours, and or at least an hour long they gave me, because it just, there's beauty in the fact that it depicts the horrors of war. It just says it's absurd that we continue on down this path and we continue to engage in wars. Look at how it affected all these people in this small town in the context of the Spanish Civil War. It just tells you over and over again in so many different ways why this is wrong, and in that it's so powerful. It hung in the chamber of the Security Council at the UN for a while, and it's interesting because somebody, some bureaucrat or some nation or somebody in control decided there was a debate that was happening, I think, about the Iraq War or one of the conflicts in the world, they decided to cover it up for a while because they thought it was too much of a distraction. And someone actually, had to point out to them, it's not a distraction. It is part of this debate.
It's at the Reina Sofia. It's returned to Spain.
Yeah,
It's at home now. No, I think for myself personally, as an artist, when I was young at the university, I was very enamored of Katty Kollwitz. I mean, her depiction of war victims, of suffering. I look at Goya's work. There's so many artists, yes, and of course Guernica. I don't know that I have what it takes within me to be able to actually depict that level of suffering. I would maybe be doing a different type of art if I could. It's not what I can do. This past year, last year, I did a mural with students at the university. That was a whole different experience.
Right.
It's not the demographic I'm usually working with, but they had approached me. It was the group who from the union who put on the exhibits at the unions, the union directorate, and they wanted to take art out of the gallery and out onto the street. And we ended up being able to put a mural up at the Humanities building, and these students were amazing. I have never gone through an approval process that was that grueling. Getting an approval from the university was not like the state, the city, the county, anything I've ever been through. This young project manager, she would just say, okay, every hoop that we had to jump through. But when they would question me, and we were talking about content, and they put out emails, they blasted the entire campus and got feedback from people on what they wanted to see in the mural, and then wonderful feedback from the young people on that committee. I would have made something that was maybe more politically charged.
Yeah.
But I think the worry was that with the regents and, the legislature in this kind of day and age, they were probably wise to keep it as non-confrontational as possible. But I also said the same thing to them. I said, my work just is not controversial. I wish that it were. If I could change it to be that way, I would.
And you're being very generous, but having worked with the city bureaucracy this week in terms of the Umoja art exhibit and what's supposed to be a much utilized community space that's been around for 20 years, but really hasn't been utilized especially well. Again, each of the individual department heads and the people we were talking to, that Malala and I were meeting with, were very well intentioned, but connecting the dots and getting them to work together and working around a bureaucracy and trying to get good art up, it doesn't always work so well. I understand what you're saying, but I think there's a depth to the art. It does, of course, not everything has to be on the level of Guernica or a depiction of the Holocaust or nuclear war or other atrocities. There's still power in just authentically communicating the human spirit. So we'll come back to what Malala's thesis was. So Malala grew up was born in Tulsa, or near there, I think. The Tulsa race riots were in the decade preceding her birth. And so I just asked her about that, and she immediately, again, had that response. Well, you white people are always looking at the negative, and do you not understand? I'm trying to remember the cogent example she gave of community organizing. And there was essentially a black Wall Street in Tulsa, in which there was a lot of economic prosperity, a lot of black business people showing their acumen and other things, which of course burned down in the context of race riots and other things. And she gave that as an example. But if you're going to mention the race riots, you've got to mention how people came back. If you're going to mention looting of businesses, then you have to talk about how the community rallied. And that's essentially, I think, her point. But when it comes to what you do, where was I going? Actually, let me flash back to Center for Families for a second. Because I think you helped me with this a little bit, but there was a video that I produced when we had a bunch of people coming and learning about some of the new programs. And one of the things in describing the work at the Respite Center that I was able to do, and I think you were a part of this, is that the young people who pass through the doors there often have a chance to draw art. In this case, basically I think the assignment was, can you draw something evocative of home? And it broke my heart to see that a good deal of those images were images of cars.
Yeah, yeah. A home is a big theme. I think it's a big theme for all of us. I've thought about on the front of, in the front foyer of the Social Justice Center, they had asked me a couple of years ago, oh, would you do something here? And I've thought, well, maybe what would be appropriate there would be homes, since so many homeless people are storing their belongings there. It's pretty, I don't know, unbelievable is the right word, but ironic that, you know, one of the primary places for homeless people is Brenda's porch. You know?
Right.
It's like, you know, it's like, okay. But especially, I think, when I was at the Respite Center, the theme of home and what home means, and home can be a place of safety. It isn't always, but a home goes beyond that mere shelter. A home is something that really you carry within you. So that theme of home, we often would explore that through art. I did a whole series when I was at the Respite Center a number of times where kids would make dolls.
Right.
And they were just out of fabric. And those, you know, would have the staff
find creative ways to frame them, kind of make little awards for people.
But write down stories that children were telling about them. And we found that kids would make 5, 6, 8, you know, it would be very hard to get them to leave one for us to put on exhibit. They really wanted to take them home. There was something about that representation of a human being that was immensely powerful. And what I ended up realizing is that the doll, it is home, and it is safety, and it's an external representation of themselves in a way, but it's also a companion that travels with you on your journey. And so many of the kids there, 90% of the families are affected by poverty. A lot of those kids didn't know where they would be going, where they'd be sleeping next. And I think the situation, since I've been away from Center for Families for the past couple of years, if anything, has only gotten worse.
So I would just explain the context. Remembering some of these photos, or rather these paintings that the kids had made, it is this more complicated reality that Bolele evokes about the African American experience. I think applies in this case, because these paintings were using vibrant colors, and very often there was also a theme. I mean, their family was placed in the car in the picture. And, you know, so alongside what must be a harrowing thing for a kid not to know where they're going to sleep, or that they have to, you know, crunch up in a car at night or whatever. But we have our family. We have people who love us, and we're in a horrible situation, but we're getting through this together. So part of the challenge, I think, you know, of non-presumptive, culturally expressive, authentic art is not to presume what it should be, but allow people to put the whole spectrum of their experience on there. The pathos, the challenge, the other things, but how they come out the other side is often what you'll see in the same art.
Just last night, I met with a group at 100 State who are going to be doing a mural.
Could you explain what 100 State is?
At 100 State in Madison, it's an incubator of sorts for creative ideas. They also do have an art component. Dane Arts has paid a membership, and some of the groups that are affiliated with us are meeting there. This was a group that's working with homeless youth, and they're doing a mural.
Yeah.
And meeting those kids, I had one of those days where, you know, some days it feels like 3 steps forward, 18 back, in terms of, you know, doing so much now as an administrator. And just meeting with those kids and hearing their ideas and seeing how far they've gone with this project, it was definitely what I needed in terms of something regenerative and rejuvenative. But I was going to go back to those days at the Center for Families, and especially the Respite Center. I think that what I learned over and over and over was not only the power of art, but also the ways in which people in this day and age, families, especially children, are affected by poverty.
Yes.
Poverty, 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 poverty. And poverty, that it so shapes the trauma that young people are experiencing. And these are the kids that I'm working with now. These are the kids I'm working with here in Sun Prairie at this Prairie Phoenix Academy, the kids at the SAIL program. I met with the director of all the special programs in Madison the other day, and he said, yeah, this is definitely where the need is. And it's developmentally appropriate for a teenager to resist authority and to be disengaged. But these are kids that have that same appropriate developmental response. And then on top of that, they've got the chaos of not knowing where they're going to live. One of the kids last night, he said, "You are going to be so happy to hear this." And I said, "Okay, tell me, let me know." He said, "I think it's Men's Warehouse, but some organization, I don't think it was Netrobos, I think Men's Warehouse is loaning me a tux so I can go to prom." And I said, "That makes me so happy."
Very cool.
Yeah. And you know, on top of everything else, where's your next meal coming from? Where are you going to sleep tonight? Can you afford? No, you can't afford what it takes to be able to go to prom. And the fact that somebody's stepping up and saying,
Walker
hey,
administration would probably say, "But what a waste of money for someone to give a tuxedo, at a time when you
I'm sure this kid's
shouldn't buy
just-
seafood and you shouldn't do all this other
I'm
stuff."
sure he's just getting it for the night. No, I think it's an absolute fabulous story. I was so happy to hear that.
I guess what I'm trying to draw out of this, though, is the notion, all the stigmas that we have about people homeless or in poverty or unemployed or whatever. We want to blame, we want to say, hey, well, there must be something they messed up or they didn't do because I'm not in that place, and that people who don't understand their privilege and all these other concepts or how people could get there or are forgetting about a time in their life that's difficult. So, but on the encouraging side, what I think you don't realize about some of the people you're talking about, that young man who took great pride in the fact that he was going to be out there and be able to do what he needs to do. He may not be sure about where his next meal is coming from or where he's going to be living, a few months
He'll be at East High's prom tomorrow night.
But he'll be at East Prime, and that's the kind of thing we need to lift up again and again.
Yeah, and that makes me super happy to have heard that story and to know that he'll be there, that there are other kids who will be at prom this weekend who have been helped by somebody, that somebody in the community here is understanding how important those little things are.
But without getting into too cliche, but resilience and the ability to see your way through and the ability to take a $700 a month disability income and still keep food on your table for your family, instead of stigmatizing and pointing fingers and somehow claiming that somebody must really have made a big mistake and screwed up and is somehow responsible for their status, we should be holding those folks up. Those are the people who know how to make the most of resources. They are the ones who are exhibiting.
These are heroes.
These are heroes. These are people who are showing what the meaning of love and family and community is. And so you give them a chance, I think, and this is what I want to come back to. Again, you're great to be very self-aware and conscious enough to not be presumptive, to not be ego-invested. But Sharon, what you do is such a special gift because you are facilitating the ability of other people to see the beauty and the expression, the catharsis that comes out of being able to express yourself through art. And being able to give that gift to someone else is a really powerful thing.
Well, thank you. I see myself as the orchestra conductor.
Exactly.
I do think I've become a better painter. I never considered myself as a painter at all. I paint because to me it's a way of interacting with other people. But it's my responsibility that the overall mural or piece of art have a pleasing coherence.
Right.
But I'm not going to let the violinists play all on their own and the drummers play all on their own and create disharmony. And yet I'm not writing the music.
Exactly.
They're writing the music. They're telling their own story. I'm just a vehicle for that to be able to happen. And when I'm here in Sun Prairie with the Prairie Phoenix Academy, I'm not at West High. And when I'm at West High, I'm not at the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah.
And this is why I approached the county. I had originally approached the city a couple years back. It was just not the right time economically, although Soglin was very enthusiastic about the idea. When Mark Fryray took over almost a year ago now at Dane County Cultural Affairs, Mark had been a longtime friend. And I approached him. I said, Mark, what about doing a countywide program? Can we team up and duplicate what I've been doing? And he said, well, I like the idea. What would it take? I said, well, first of all, it's going to take a training program. The fact that I developed the training program at the Respite Center for people working with traumatized kids means that I know how to develop a training program for working with youth. The difference is that we're working with art. So there's training artists to be able to do this work. There's beautifying communities and doing that throughout the county, reaching some of those rural communities that are resource poor when it comes to the arts, taking this kind of work to some of those South Side neighborhoods in Madison, also that are resource poor in the arts.
Absolutely.
And for me, particularly engaging youth. And when I say youth, I mean 10 to 25. So to me, those are the three prongs of the program that I'm developing. And yes, I have those days where it's 18 steps back because now I'm working so much as an administrator.
Yeah.
And yet I'm so thrilled to think that this kind of work, which obviously can be done by a core of people. You look at the Philly mural program, you look at Groundswell in Brooklyn, you look at programs around the country, and other people are doing this.
Right.
There are young people in Philly who started out as taggers who are now lead artists. Groundswell has a portfolio development component. They've got kids, once again, who are street artists who are now getting into RISD. They're getting into Pratt. They're getting into some of the finest art schools in the country.
Right.
So after 30 years of the Philly program, I think 20 some at Groundswell, we're seeing these results of other programs.
Go ahead.
And we ought to be able to do this here in Dane County.
I know our producer's going to step out and give us our 5-minute warning in a second, but before we get to that point, because I want to kind of wind up with you've already given a lot of different suggestions, but how people can become engaged, both with Dane Arts, mural arts, and other activities. So no, let me just, I'm going to go a different direction first, so we'll end up with that. But as you're talking, I remember going to the opening, I think it was in the late 1980s, of the Women's Arts Museum in Washington. It was the first museum of its kind. Having a mother that was involved. Mary Cassatt and Georgia O'Keeffe were very important. Georgia O'Keeffe, born right here outside of Sun Prairie, by the way. But they were in isolation. There were other artists that were out there, and yet and other potential artists who had never been supported and whose work had never been cultivated. And I think this transfers, of course, to African American experiences, immigrant, other minority experiences. This is the tragedy of the past, that art was often only given to a select few people, the elite, and held up only in a few ways. Are we moving to a time where some of that's being countered, where art is finally becoming democratized and through efforts like this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And young people get it.
Yeah.
I'm a studio trained artist. I have a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin. I would think that these are my peers. I send information to the artist group here in town, that I had belonged to for years and years. They've never once listed any mural dedication I've had. Young people, when I first went to Flickr, I found I was in all sorts of sites, street art sites, mural sites, and who put me there? 20-year-olds. That's
right.
My peer circle, are 20-year-old street taggers. And I'm happy I'm happy to have a peer circle. A lot of artists don't.
Just to back up, so as you were growing up as a young woman, I apologize because we're kind of short in time. So, but as you were, we will have you back for hours on end later on. But I do want to, because my own mom, I think not having the benefit of the peers that went before her, again, Cassatt is just such an interesting study, in terms of how she asserted herself into the Impressionist movement and into France and just, way before her time in terms of what she was able to accomplish. O'Keeffe the same way. But what a tragedy it is that there were so many other women who didn't. I guess to turn that on its head, so as you grew into an awareness of art and what it mean in your own life, how much of that was a struggle to actively engage as a woman? I mean, there are extra barriers, weren't there?
Oh, sure. There are barriers as a woman. I think there's also, to me, I felt even greater barriers being a Midwesterner.
Yeah.
I think for many, many, many years, I really believed that if I weren't in New York, I would not be making it. And let alone Chicago, but that really you need to be in New York. I went to the junior school of the Art Institute of Chicago as a teenager, and then came here and of course fell in love with the town, and I knew that as an artist I would not have the prominence I would have if I were to be in New York or Chicago. Like I say, it bothered me for a long, long time. I finally just gave all that up. I'm very happy being able to make the mark that I can make here, and like I say, it isn't even my mark as much as it is all those people that have sort of that have channeled through me. And no, I might not have the reputation of any of those other people. I don't really even care anymore about that. And I would hope or think that at some point Mary Cassatt got there, Georgia O'Keeffe got there, and the people who are all those nameless artists who are expressing themselves and finding not only a satisfaction that confirms their own being and their own place on the planet, but also being able to share work. Young people, when you ask... We're running
out of time, so I'm sorry.
Okay, well, when you ask me if things are changing, I think absolutely. Young people these days are much more interested in art that's democratic. It's not to say that they don't go to galleries, but they definitely are looking at street art. They're looking at murals. They get it. And just in conclusion, hopefully my contact info will be up on the screen at some point. Anybody who's interested in volunteering, in working with us, with the mural program with Dane Arts, email me. And I will get back to you.
So I just wanted to amplify a couple of things. We haven't had our 2-minute warning yet, so we're almost out of time. But I just what you were saying about being from the Midwest. So it's one of the gifts my mom gave me. First of all, when the time I was a few months old, I was at the Art Institute, going accompanying her to classes. The Nelsons, Atkins, all the different Midwestern, the Walker, the Minnesota Art Museum, all the great treasures we have in the middle of the country. But my favorite thing to do is to wander down Fifth Avenue and stop in at the Guggenheim and accompany the docent of the tour who's proclaiming the joys of this Frank Lloyd Wright design building and explaining that I come from a county in the Midwest where there are hundreds of his work. Thank you. So not all of it is in New York. So that's part of it. But also, the triumph of, I think, again, we talk about democratization of art. And just all of the breakthroughs that have been made for women, for people of color, for low-income people, that it truly is something that's for everyone. And so just one last pitch, if we could. Again, we're down to our last minute or so. Dane Arts Mural Art, what is it and how do people become involved?
It's a brand new program. It's part of Dane County Cultural Affairs Commission. It's part of Dane Arts. Our goal is to be doing murals all over the entire county. We hope to, of course, do many in Madison, in poor neighborhoods especially, in rural areas. I am really looking forward to coming back here to Sun Prairie. We're also looking at Fitchburg and Verona right now. We hope that this program will grow. We want to see it last for at least another 10, 20 years. We hope to be engaging youth, and we definitely are interested in having people volunteer. We're looking for materials. I could use a lift. I could use professional grade spray equipment. Hallman Lindsay here in Sun Prairie has been very, very generous with paint.
So actually, I do have to stop now because we will have you back. And essentially, though, people should see this as an invitation to participate, to become involved.
Absolutely. If you're working with a group of youth and you want to know if there's a possibility to get them engaged, contact me.
So the information's been flashing on the screen. We encourage people to get in touch with you and again to see this as part of their own journey. We will have you back again and again, I guarantee. We're going to go out and we're going to cover some of the production of those murals. And again, you're going to become our new best friend. So Sharon.
Okay, well, thank you, John.
It was a great show. It was,
Yeah,
it was a wonderful conversation.
I appreciate all that you're doing
Oh, thank you.
out there in the community as well.
All right. Well, and this has been Forward Forum. We really thank you for joining us. And do invite you to provide your feedback by writing to us at forwardforumshow@gmail.com, or you can contact us here at the Sun Prairie Media Center via telephone or via email. And please give us your feedback, your ideas for future shows. Thanks again, and have a great week.